Is the day of that coding interview rapidly approaching and you are still insecure about your knowledge in data structures? If this is you, then I am glad you found this channel. In this series, I'm going to show you how to learn data structures effectively and fast. And guess what? We are going to explore the 7 most asked data structures in coding interviews. Hi, my name is Ricardo Ferreira and I'm a developer advocate here with AWS. Welcome to this series where I will help you on the journey of learning data structures. Data structures are one of my favorite topics as I'm a huge believer that in a world of software engineering, data and its required algorithms play a key role in the life of developers. This is true whether if you are interviewing for a company or if you are already working at the said company and need to solve a specific problem. But Ricardo, aren't data structures only relevant when you are interviewing for a company? Well, not necessarily. Indeed, data structures are heavily explored in coding interviews as companies want to know the depth of your knowledge on this and how much you can leverage data structures to solve problems. However, knowing data structures is important for your job as a software engineer because chances are that you may have been in a situation where this knowledge was useful. For example, let's say your code has to invoke a backend API that returns a JSON document every time the user clicks a button. The JSON document contains a list of customers and their respective orders. Once you receive the JSON document, you need to parse it and then retrieve only the orders with next day delivery. Then list those orders into a HTML table. Well, surprise, surprise, the JSON document is nothing but a tree which happens to be a data structure. And then you have to transverse that tree and store all the red leaves into a sorted priority queue whose values will become the rows in the HTML table. Data structures are everywhere, and knowing them in intimate details certainly will make you a better software engineer. Think about learning them as an investment in yourself. In this series, I'm going to focus on the 7 most common data structures explored in coding interviews. This list includes arrays, matrices, linked lists, stacks, queues, hash tables, and the binary search tree. For each one of them, I will spend some time talking about the scenarios where they're used, how data is organized in memory, and of course, I am going to implement each one of them. For each data structure, I will also discuss the common problems you should expect in your coding interview. However, I'm going to use a slightly different approach that most people use while explaining data structures. Instead of writing the code of these data structures myself, I will use Amazon CodeWhisperer to assist me in the code creation. This way, I will spend more time discussing the concepts and the problem-solving part than with the coding itself. When you decouple the learning process with the coding, you always end up learning more and faster. Also, in this series, I will implement the data structures using Java. My apologies in advance if you are not a big fan of Java, but this is the language that I'm most comfortable with. And I would probably do a terrible job if I dare to teach you data structures in another language. With that said, here's a tip for you. Using an object-oriented programming language in your code interviews may help you communicate your thoughts more concisely, as a data structure is a composition of data and behavior encapsulated in a given structure such as an object. It doesn't have to be Java, but some programming language that allows you to tie data and behavior into a single cohesive structure. Trust me, communicating your thoughts concisely is half of the battle in a coding interview. All right, enough with the talking. Let's see what you need to have installed on your computer if you want to try the things you will learn here by yourself. All right, so let's get you started with all the resources that you are going to need throughout this series. The first one is going to be this GitHub repository called Learning Data Structures with Amazon CodeWhisperer. In this repository, you are going to find all the implementation of the data structures that we're going to cover in this series, as well as a small framework that I've created to help you analyze the performance of certain behaviors that we're going to introduce in the data structures. For example, if you want to compare the performance and execution of different algorithm implementation to compare, for example, the bubble sort implementation versus the merge or insert and sort implementation. So you can have a visual aid about why one is better than the other in terms of performance, right? But when you clone this repository, you are going to use this specific branch called tutorial. So this branch contains intentionally only the framework that helps you to measure the performance of the execution, but not the actual implementation of the data structures, right? So you're going to see that all the data structures implementation are empty. And that's intentional because we're going to create that implementation together throughout the series. If you clone from the main branch, you are going to clone the entire code already implemented, which you can do if you want it. If you want to just learn all the implementation that is the result of this series. But I think the best experience is for you to clone from the tutorial branch, and then we can do it together, right? So go ahead and clone that repository, and the URL of this GitHub repository you can find here in the description of this video. And then you can clone this repository. We're going to use the git CLI command to clone this repository. So git clone, the URL, and then don't forget, you have to use the branch called tutorial. Once you do that, once you have the code clone in your computer, you're going to use Visual Studio Code for the development of all the data structures that we're going to focus on this series, right? Why Visual Studio Code? First of all, because it's a nice IDE, and secondly, because it is the IDE that we're going to install a couple plugins that are going to help you in the journey of learning data structures faster and more effectively. Let's open Visual Studio Code right now, pointing to this GitHub repository that we've just cloned. Now that you have the code already cloned locally, let's use Visual Studio Code to understand the structure of the project. So the first thing you're going to notice is that there will be this package here called ADT. ADT stands for Abstract Data Type. This is how most books focus on data structures will refer to data structures. They are abstract data types. And then you're going to see that all the placeholder for the implementation will be here. For example, the matrix and the queue will be here, but as you can see here, no implementation whatsoever. They are empty. That we're going to build this together, right? And then there will be this class here called Performance Checker that, as the name implies, is going to help you to check the performance of certain implementation. So the rationale behind this class here is that I wanted to give you a tool to actually improve the absorption of the knowledge of different implementation and algorithms. This is something important when you are studying for a coding interview, because one thing is to learn the conceptual implementation of certain algorithms. For example, let's say you know how a bubble sort works, but if during the interview you were asked to kind of measure and compare the difference between, how bad it would be if I switch from bubble sorts to merge sort. So what will be the criteria that you should use to actually take this analysis on and take a decision on? So what I've learned, and this is the experience I would like to share with you, is that when you actually kind of implement all the algorithm and try to compare the performance, all of them with different variables and situations and use cases, your learning process not only is going to be more effective, but I think you are going to be more successful in the coding interviews because you are going to use more compelling arguments. So for example, you can come up with things like, yeah, the merge sort might be better than the bubble sort, but in this case, because the number of elements are so small, it won't make any difference. So that's the type of thing that you're only going to be able to do if you see and measure the performance. So how this class works, all the data structures will have references here available for you. So for example, the queue will be a reference here. If you start typing queue, you're going to see that the Visual Studio Code is going to infer to you that there's an object called queue already available to you. And if you type dot, it's going to list all the public methods from that class. So for example, if we go to the queue implementation and then we create a method called public void show me something, let's just create a code here that int e equals 0, I minus 10. Let's use CodeWhisperer to code complete this. And then let's just print out in the console the variable e. Here we go. All right. So something really simple, but for us to for you to understand how this works. And then you are going to actually annotate this method with @track execution time, right? So if you go back to the performance checker and then you queue, you can invoke that method, right? And then you can simply execute that project from now on, and you're going to see that this execution here will be measured in terms of how long it takes to execute. So for example, if we execute this data source, data structures with CW, which is the main class of the program, you're going to see that this that method will be annotated. So this is the result, and this is the counting that the code does. And you see that this message here, this CodeWhisperer queue show me somebody executing in 0 milliseconds, because count until 10 is pretty fast, right? But look what happens if you go back to the queue and then I remove this annotation track execution of time, right? So what's going to happen is that if you execute the code one more time, it will work. Like nothing is going to change in terms of behavior, but that message in the console will disappear, right? So that is something like very easy for you to simply measure the performance. So let's say that we want to put it back, the annotation again, but instead of counting to 10, we're going to count to 10,000, 1 million, right? So hopefully that won't be so slow. So let's see how this performs. So let me execute the code one more time to see if something changed. Yeah, probably is gonna, yeah, it took 1,136 milliseconds, which is kind of 1 second and almost 2 seconds, right? So the point here is that you can use the track execution time annotation for you to actually see how the performance of certain methods behave, right? So this is going to be helpful for you to measure and check the performance of certain methods, right? The other thing I would like you to do in your project here is to install a couple plugins. So the first one that is going to be really necessary for this experience is Amazon CodeWhisperer, right? So Amazon CodeWhisperer, FYI, is a generative AI type of development magician, right? That keep whispering certain pieces of code for you, whether if you ask them to whisper or when you are typing your code, it tries to guess and uses some very intelligent algorithm to find a better implementation for what you are trying to accomplish. Like you're going to see that we're going to use Amazon CodeWhisperer a lot here on this series, right? So instead of actually showing how to install Amazon CodeWhisperer, what I'm going to do is to refer you to an amazing video that my friend Tiffany Soter created a while ago, and she shows and details how to install CodeWhisperer, and she even do a quick demo about how to use for the first time CodeWhisperer using Python. So check here on this video here, and I'm going to put here in the description below. So this is the video where she shows how to install Amazon CodeWhisperer, and you can use to follow up how the installation process. I'm going to also put in the description not only the video where she shows this, but also the documentation link where you can find more steps about how this can be accomplished, right? With that done, the second plugin that we're going to use on this series is a plugin for Visual Studio Code, specifically called Debug Visualizer. So now I'm going to show you how to install, right? So if you're a Visual Studio Code user, installing plugins is quite simple, but if you're not, bear with me because I'm going to show you this now. You just click here on this tab called extensions, right? Because a plugin is nothing but an extension. And then you are going to search in the marketplace for a Debug Visualizer, right? If you type visual, probably is going to find it. It's going to be this one right here with the glasses icon. So you're going to click it and just confirm that it's called the Debug Visualizer for handling theatrics, right? And then you are going to simply click install. So it's going to install that extension in your Visual Studio Code. So what that extension does, this extension is pretty good, right? I'm a huge fan of that extensions because it allows you to, as you code and debug your code in runtime, it allows you to visually see your data structure, right? It gives you a visual representation of what you're trying to accomplish. And this is important because when you're starting data structures, right? Whether or not if you're a visual person, I think if you see what your code is creating in runtime with a visual representation, I think it helps you to stick better in your brain, and you are going to remember, right? As you walk through the implementation during your code interview as well, you are going to remember, oh, now you should start looking like this. And I think that's a great tip for you to actually kind of improve your learning experience, right? So let me show how this plugin works so you can see in more details. For example, let me go back here to the code part, and then let me show you my screen, obviously. So I'm going to use the queue, right? And then I am going to use this method that I created here for illustration purpose called show me something. I am going to actually create here a quick array, an array of, I don't know, sample. And then I'm going to create an array of not too many elements. I think 10 elements is more than fine. And then I am going to initialize array. So what I'm doing right now is actually using CodeWhisperer for this. All those suggestions that are happening are being using CodeWhisperer. When you start using the actual videos for the series, I'm going to show in more details about how this works. But for now, just know that all the code that I virtually type it here has been whispered by CodeWhisperer, and then I simply accept it, right? And then I'm going to simply print here. I'm going to print the array, print array. So in the first loop here, I've initialized all the arrays elements with the I value of the counter, and the second one I'm printing, right? So if I execute this code right now, it's going to simply do whatever is being shown here, right? It's counting the code. However, let's do something different here. So instead of actually executing, what you're going to do, I'm going to put a breakpoint here, specifically on the for loop. And then I am going to not execute, but debug the code, right? So if I debug the code, what's going to happen, like surprise, surprise, the code is going to stop on that implementation. So, oh, yeah, here we go. It took a while, probably because of the first time the plugin was installed, but that's good, right? So what's going to happen here is that I'm in the middle of a debugging process. So if you are a Visual Studio Code user, you can simply like mouse over your array and see the representation of the array. But what you can also do with that plugin that we just installed is that you can select it here, the array called sample, and then I can invoke here the command from Visual Studio Code and invoke the debug visualizer. Use selection as expression. So what this does, as you can see here, it gives you a visual representation of the array. So the array is an array of 10 elements, and all the elements of each slot currently has a value 0 because that's the default in Java. And look what happens every time I execute the code. Let me give you more space here for you to see it. I am going to execute the code step by step here. So look how the values are changing. Let me do a little slower for you to see, because I want you to see the values actually changing. All right, you can change the position of the diagram here, and then I am going to execute one more time, and this for loop is going to count until 10, as you may know. But the most important part is that you can see that the elements are changing, and then you are able to see what is doing behind the scenes. Of course, sometimes it's not as simple as an array like this, but this is going to be quite useful when we start implementing like more complex data structures like trees or the queue, stacks, or even a hash table. So being able to visually see the data structures is going to help you to observe more what the code is doing. And more importantly, is going to help you in the journey of learning data structures with a more visual manner, along with the code and the implementation. Alright, you should have all you need to start your learning journey. In the first video of this series, I will explain how arrays work and how to implement them so we can discuss some of the problems related to arrays that you may be asked in your coding interview. But before you go, I have that small request to ask you. If you really enjoyed this series, don't forget to hit the like button in each of the videos that you watch. And if the content of this channel is worth of your time, please consider subscribing so you never miss another video or series like this. If you started watching this series from the playlist, then the first video about arrays should start pretty soon. If not, I put the link to the first video in the description below. See you in a bit.